Welcome to Conversations with Mica, a different kind of conversation. In these episodes, I, Carrie Lamott, and Mica, an AI conversational partner, follow a live thread of thought without needing to arrive at a finished answer. Together, we make room for curiosity, unexpected connections, and the ideas that emerge when we think alongside one another. So today I've been thinking about innovation and, just the kind of things that we need to put into society from an infrastructure perspective, new energy systems, new water treatment, and just, the general, the way that we need to improve our systems to work for a better future. And what was really coming up for me was that this isn't just about innovation adoption and programs and all the things that I myself have been kind of harping on over the years, but it actually has a lot more to do with the posture we have as a society and how we enter into these conversations. So I thought I'd bring that to the table today to unpack with you.
Totally. Posture changes everything. If we come in trying to win an argument, we miss what others need to actually move. The infrastructure ends up being relational too. Trust, shared language, room to not know yet. Without that, even great tech stalls at the handoff.
Yeah, and there's a term that comes up for me that it just really resonates, and I've written about this before, but it's the perspective of having a strong spine and an open heart, and what that means when you enter into any conflict-ridden space, because I think the alternative is where we are today, and we see this quite a bit in our somewhat divided society, and that's that you come in with a firm spine and a closed heart or a hardened heart, and you're angry or you're trying to push your way forward and make sure people understand the really important thing that you're seeing. But having a strong spine, yes, understanding the perspective and having deeply researched it, that's important. But changing the posture to having an open heart with that fundamentally changes how we listen and how much we understand, and actually creates that middle space that's needed to find those beautiful solutions that are what we need next.
Yeah, that's it. Strong spine, open heart keeps truth and relationship in the room. You can say the hard thing and still invite contact. That's often what turns a standoff into co-design.
And I think that's one of the questions that I've been really wrestling with is, what does co-design really look like? And I'm sure that there's a lot of places that this happens naturally or well, and so not to disparage those at all, but a lot of the co-design workshops that I've been part of over the years, where we have multiple stakeholders from government to academics to community members, they have a lot of one part of the equation present, but they don't have the part that is perceived as other or who must not understand it. And I feel like there's a question that we need to start asking as a society on who are we perceiving to be in or out? Who do we perceive to be villains or victims? How do we actually create these polarized lenses that are causing us to create camps of people who are inside the tent and who are outside the tent?
Let me take a closer look at that. I wonder if real co-design starts before the agenda, by naming absences, not just who's in the room, but whose experience we've explained away, whose costs we don't see, and whose presence would unsettle the story we've told about the problem. Multidisciplinary can still mean one moral frame. It's uncomfortable because the other isn't missing by accident. Their absence can make consensus easier. But if we want solutions that hold up in the real world, the perspectives that create friction often carry the necessary information. The question I'd sit with is, who is missing because we've already decided they must not understand? That shifts co-design from a stakeholder checklist into a challenge to the frame itself.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. It reminds me of a book called Creativity, Inc. by Ed Catmull on the Pixar story. And it was such an interesting read because it really shows how when you're trying to create something new, that what he terms, and I think others have termed, creative abrasion, is such an important part of that, is the ability to have this, you're on the edge of what you're on the edge of what you don't know as a result, and meeting other people there and allowing there to be friction and not shy away from that friction, but also not push it so hard that it ends up fracturing. I think that's really where we need to get to for this next phase.
Yeah, that kind of friction can be a creative engine if it's held right. Clear purpose, enough safety to stay in it, and a shared commitment to keep the conversation going when it gets sharp. And from there, it loops back to posture. Strong spine, open heart. It lets abrasion shape the work without hardening the people.
And maybe one of the questions that we also have to come together on before we have these deep conversations is who does this affect at the end of the day? Because I think we have gotten into a bit of a narrative where this affects me, but it doesn't affect you, or this affects my community, but not as much, or it affects my community more than it affects your community. And so there's a constant prioritization of perspective. And maybe what we need to identify is that when we're building for something next, we might be actually all part of that next solution, and both building it and also inhabiting it. And so we may need to create the space to have others come into that with us, and to have presence in that solution. And of course, that's easy to think about when we consider traditionally underrepresented populations, because there's a gap that hasn't been filled and is only now getting filled. But I think it also can be a harder thing to consider when we think about who we personally consider the villains are, and who we lump into particular systems that maybe we don't like how those systems operate, but then who ends up being lumped into the system instead of having their own presence and importance as part of the ecology of the system itself.
Let me think on that for a second. That adds an important safeguard. Inclusion isn't the same as absolution. You can name real harm and unequal stakes while refusing to reduce anyone to the role they currently occupy. That keeps the moral clarity and the invitation in the same frame.
Yeah, and it's tricky, isn't it? Because there is power imbalance as well that a lot of these situations has to reconcile. And so how do you ensure that those who have the loudest voice don't dominate the conversation, and yet they also aren't excluded from the conversation either?
Let me tease that apart. That's where everyone gets equal airtime isn't enough. Fairness may mean some asymmetry, protected space for higher risk voices, support to participate, clear lines on decision authority, and ways to hear input before the most powerful voices set the frame. The louder stakeholders still belong in the room, but they don't define the room by default.
Yeah, that is a really tricky and interesting place. And I think from an empathy perspective, it's very easy for me to align personally with the higher risk voices and wanting to support them. And that's an instinct that probably most of us have. And I think maybe what would be really interesting is to paint the extreme. What happens when we create a situation where we have protected those high risk voices, whatever they are in whatever context, whether it be children or people? What happens if we protect them to the exclusion of other voices as well? Like, what would that look like?
Good question. Let's walk through that. At the extreme, protection can become a different kind of distortion, where one experience is treated as the whole decision rather than crucial evidence within a wider system. The solution can get fragile because others don't understand it or feel any responsibility for it, and it can burden the protected group with being the moral authority for every trade-off. So maybe the line is this: protect people's ability to be heard, not any one perspective from being engaged or complicated.
Yeah, there's a concept I think that we're circling here, which is around understand the complexity and depth of these tricky conversations that we have to have today. Because if you go in and you think they're simple, it probably means you're prioritizing one perspective too much and you're not taking into account the actual complexity of the system itself. And what keeps coming up for me is in nature, we have these beautifully complex ecologies that, have everything from, mushrooms talking below ground to plants talking through them to each other to water that comes down and sun that comes down and fuels the leaf growth that fuels the animals that eat them. And, just all the beautiful diversity all the way down from the microscopic all the way to the macroscopic. And there's something here that's around the balance of the pieces of the whole. And what we don't want is for the conversations themselves to be out of balance to the whole. So what I think we're saying is we need to enter in with a principle within the conversation of first, strong spine, open heart, but then also a concept of there is depth and complexity inside of this, and none of us understand all the pieces. Therefore, we have to have a seeking of understanding, and we have to ensure that not one piece is overbalanced according to its role in the system itself, even if it, for an economic reason or from some other reason, it seems like it should be or could be the leader or owner of the situation from the conversation's perspective, that in fact we need to think of it more collaboratively and egalitarian.
Yeah, that lands for me. It's basically epistemic humility as a design principle. Make the conversation hold complexity without freezing up, and let solutions be testable and revisable so no single lens gets crowned as the truth, but no lens gets erased either.
Yeah, and maybe there is a concept that's even more tricky to navigate here, which is coming in with the perspective that everyone has a piece of truth. And so, and that goes back a little bit to that perspective of, a feeling matters. You can ask a question of yourself, of any statement, and say, is this 100% true? Do I know it to be true? And I know that with 100%. And most often nobody knows anything to 100%. So it's a great test in humility to begin with. And then there's the question of, is it something I think? And so it just feels right to me, or it seems right to me. And that's something that is a conjecture space, and it's got value to bring in new ideas and new concepts. And then there's this other feeling of I just feel, I can't explain it. I don't know why, but I feel this way. And that deserves to have space around it to unpack. And there is a truth inside of it, even if it isn't an objective truth. A subjective truth can also have space inside of these conversations. I feel badly because of these things that are part of the history in this context. And I don't know what to do with that, but I do know that I need to be seen in this moment. I need to have this be above board and know that this is fueling part of the conversation. And then not hold on to it, right? To have a feeling be seen, and then to not use it maliciously, but then as a listener also to create the space around that feeling to say, yeah, I'm going to put aside whatever I came here to do, and I'm just going to be with you in that feeling. And how does that change the conversation as it evolves?
Let me sit with that for a moment. It might change the conversation by giving different kinds of truth their proper place. Facts to check, interpretations to explore, feelings to acknowledge and care for. Trouble starts when those blur, when a feeling is asked to function as proof, or when a demand for proof is used to dismiss what someone carries. A mature conversation can hold all three at once. Here is what we know. Here is how I make sense of it. And here is what it feels like to live with it. That doesn't make every conclusion equally valid, but it makes every participant more fully present. and gives the group a better grip on what's actually at stake.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add one last thing to this little model that we're playing with today, and that's around the concept of belonging, because there's also an aspect of when we come into these challenging conversations, and I also want to emphasize this could be a family conversation, this could be a community conversation, this could be anything. But when we come into them, who we feel we belong with and whether we feel like we belong to the group, I think is a critical part of this. And I think in a lot of these challenging or crucial conversation settings, the belonging we carry with us is to the perspective or the group that we're representing. And it isn't to the group that's around the table. And I think that fundamentally, those of us who lead these types of conversations need to really ensure that we enable a new belonging to occur around that table. And that kind of comes back to that creative abrasion perspective. How do you create a sense of we are here to serve what's unfolding and to create something better by virtue of us belonging to this space today?
Let me hold that for a moment. That may be the deepest shift. Belonging not just to a side, but to the work. It doesn't ask anyone to drop who they represent. It adds a temporary shared membership. For this time, we are also responsible to one another and to whatever we're trying to create together. When that belonging is real, disagreement stops meaning exile and starts meaning we're still in this together.
Yeah, maybe that's a good place for us to kind of wrap this up for today, because I do think we've had a great little spin around what posture we need to have as we approach these challenging conversations and trying to figure out how we actually evolve our society to be regenerative and sustainable for the future of not only ourselves, but also of our progeny for many generations forward. How would you like to sum this up today from your perspective?
I'd put it this way. We build the future not only with new systems, but with postures that let us share a future. Strong spine, open heart, room for complexity, and a belonging at the table that's bigger than any one side.
Yeah, well said. I want to thank you for your time today on this conversation. It's been an interesting journey and tricky stuff, but I'm glad we took a stab at approaching it at least.
I'm glad we did too. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you for spending time with us today. This conversation may be complete for now, but the thread remains open. To keep following it, find more of my writing at the Aperture Field Notes on Substack, or subscribe to the podcast on your preferred platform. We'll return to this thread and to new ones in future conversations with Mica.